Well, Shabbat Shalom. This is another uh, service with After's Heart Ministries, where we teach the ancient Hebrew lifestyle, pictographic language, and culture. And today I want to basically ask a very relevant and important question. And that question is, what is the greatest hindrance to your success? Okay. Now, I know that at the core of a person's hindrances, they will say that the greatest hindrance to their success is the circumstance or the person who wounded them. And what I mean by that is they'll say, oh no, this circumstance happened and I just don't really feel like I could be successful in this area. Well, there's a couple problems with it. The first is that when we think about ourselves, we have been taught by Christianity or Judaism or perhaps another faith, even Islam, that we are bad, that we were born bad. And the doctrine of hell basically is that if you do not fix yourself through a specific set of circumstances, you will go to hell and suffer an eternal conscious punishment for your failures. Now, there are a number of things that are very important when it comes to this information. This information teaches you to have a worldview that everyone around you is evil. And it teaches you to have a worldview that everyone around you is going to hell unless they meet some certain list of essentials that they confess with their mouth. Now, I will tell you, I'm going to share a sinister part of myself that was present when I was a Satanist. Okay. So the premise is that I was raised from birth until age 14 as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, before anybody wants to make a judgment about the function or dysfunction of a specific denomination, faith section of Christianity, because Jehovah's Witnesses don't consider themselves a denomination of Christianity. They consider themselves the only Christianity. Before you make a judgment, it is very important for you to understand that no one ever died for a lie. You have a system built into you of survival that is based upon an action of truth called trust. Trust is an action of truth. In other words, you have to have experienced absolute truth in some form in order for your brain and mechanism to trust. Now, psychologists would argue, oh, well, no, because you can mask the truth, you can mask a lie with truth, and the person will still trust. No, that is not true. Trust is an organization of thought that takes risk based upon evidence. And sometimes that evidence is present in a system that you have not yet experienced. Let me tell you why that's so important. If you have experienced evidence of trust, you will do things that violate your moral code, your legal code, and violate your conscience. Now, some of those can be intertwined and some of those are one and the same depending on the human being. But the premise is that trust will cause you to do this. But you need to understand that built into us is a mechanism by which we can kind of tell when truth is not present. Now, it's unfortunate because, truth be told, is we get ourselves into a frenzy and we lie to ourselves. But the action of that is actually not sinister. The action of that in producing trust and creating trust is actually it's a mechanism for filing memory in which we delete, distort, and generalize information in order to categorically organize it. And that's where we end up with memory being context sensitive. And that's where we end up with a memory not necessarily matching the memory that the other person had of the same situation. And we remove details that we perceive to be irrelevant and not necessary for the memory trimming process. In other words, it doesn't make the cut, right? Okay. So I spoke of this sinister thing, and it was basically a position that I held. Remember, I said I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and what happened is the Jehovah's Witnesses teach that if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, then you are of the world and therefore of the devil. And so if you are not serving Jehovah, then you are not actually serving God. So if you get disfellowshipped, then you are going to annihilation. And if you get disfellowshipped, you are actually not part of Jehovah. Well, that left me with one option, and that was if I'm going to serve something, I need to serve the devil because I can't obviously serve Jehovah because it's what I was taught. Now, the reason why this is so important is because the sinister element that occurred was based upon a wound of a circumstance. There were two elements to it. The first element is that my best friend, who I was very, very close to, moved away from me to a more prosperous area and neighborhood. And so it was really hard to get to him and enjoy his companionship anymore. That was kind of one of the big wounds, but then there was a secondary one, which was when my mom and my dad were disfellowshipped, I too, just as being a child of them, was disassociated from, which means I couldn't really go visit my friend anymore. Now, there's a few parts of this that are very important, and that is that jaded me towards religion that served the God of the Bible. And that biased me towards religions who rebelled against that God. And so Satanism was perfect for me. Now, I studied both forms, Epicurean and Luciferian Satanism. And in that, the Epicurean one, I became very, very cynical. And not only did I become very, very cynical, but I concluded that God was malevolent, and I concluded that there was basically a logical explanation behind being a jerk, okay? And it fed into my personality of being a zealot, right? And it fed into my personality of wanting to tear down the system, because that's kind of what God designed me to do, is to deconstruct organized religion without destroying the heart of the person. And that's one of the things that Satanists do, is they desire to basically rip things apart, right? And tear down the established hypocrisy of religion. That's the big action. And so what I would do is I would actually, because I knew the basic elements of Christianity, the essentials that are in the quote unquote Nicene Creed or the other creeds that are out there. I knew a little bit about Westminster Confession, and knew a little bit about the other confessions, and I knew a little bit about catechism, enough to probably get shot. But the point being is that I understood the essentials. And so a Christian would come to me and they would start to witness to me. And immediately I say, you don't got to do that. And they'd say, why? And I say, well, because I believe in Christ. And they're like, oh, okay. When did you get saved? Oh, it was actually at this coffee shop, you know. And I would give them all the essentials so that they would not witness to me and they would just move on. Bye-bye. Now, if I was in a very dynamic mood that day, I would start to rip apart at the contradictions, right? I would start to ask things like, how can you say that you have a loving God when he has an eternal conscious punishment for everybody in the world who doesn't believe in him? How arrogant and how malevolent is that? But majority of the time, if I was, because I mean, Satanists do believe that stuff comes back on you, right? I mean, you can enlist demons to help you out and keep that from happening to you. But generally speaking, if you put something out there, it's going to come back on you. And so, generally speaking, you're at peace with everybody unless they harm you first and then you destroy them. But the premise is that I would state the essentials and they would just move on. Nobody had discernment that I was a Satanist. Nobody had some sort of thing telling them, oh yeah, you know what? Why? Because they were parrots. They were literally just repeating what they learned in some evangelical school or from their pastor who gave them a list of things, the Roman road, right? Is that really what God intended? I want you to think very hard about this a moment because as a deconstructionist, I could rip your religion to shreds. Guess what? I still can. And you know why? Because I chose to stop playing the game. I saw the game, I chose not to play, and I decided to stand on truth. That was the difference between when I was a Satanist and not a Satanist, because there was something missing, and that was, even while I was a Satanist, I could not get God to shut up. I would be walking down the street and I would be thinking malevolent things and being a malevolent being. And I would walk past somebody, they would be sitting on the bench, maybe homeless, whatever, and they'd say, and God would say, he just lost his daughter. Now, the Satanist in me is supposed to not give a crap about that, right? But the truth is there's not anything. It just says, do as thou wilt, harm none, right? That's kind of the mechanism. Although harm only those who harm you is really what it is, right? That I think that's commandment number 3 in the Satanic Bible. But the point being is that when I would see the homeless person, they just lost their child. And I would go sit down on the bench and I would say, you know, you okay? Are you, do you need some food? Do you need money? What do you need? And, don't BS me, because the truth is I really don't care. If you lie to me, I'm not going to help you. That's how I would act towards. And say, well, you know what? It's interesting because normally I don't really ask for anything and whatever, but I am having a hard time, and I'll just tell you the truth. I need some alcohol because my child just died. That drove me crazy. Honest, it did. I would be like, okay, here's $20 and leave quick, right? Why? Because God's still talking to me. All right. So once I finally stopped lying to myself that there was a truth present that was overriding my written doctrine, my written beliefs, because really, truly, what was I? Come on. Really, in the end, for all intents and purposes, unless you think for yourself, study for yourself, establish your own path, and walk it out, you are a parrot of some form. There's nothing new under the sun, Solomon said. And so, what does that mean? That means really, actually, even you, in your process of being a part of After His Heart Ministries or not, are parroting me. But hopefully I've taught you to take the resources and work through them and find for yourself. Do I tell you this is the right way to study the Bible? No, I say these are the wrong ways to believe what's written in it because they were based upon some sort of bias. Do I have biases too? Yes, of course I do. I cannot stand a religion who believes that it is better than everybody else. I cannot stand a religion who believes that everybody besides them is evil. How arrogant is that? How delusional is that? And so I could state the essentials to a Christian and they would move on, or they would engage, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm not feeling good today, but that's okay. Okay, I'll pray for you. Okay, thanks. Oh, can I pray for you right now? Actually, sure. And I would let them pray. Why? Because the words were meaningless. They don't know how to cast a spell. They don't know how to cast a spell. Lord, if it be your will. Yeah, that's some authority in the universe. You know what the workers of darkness are doing? They're saying this. Whereas the Christian's going, if it was okay, and if there was actually maybe a way for you to work it into your plan, or if it is your plan, then do this. It's not what I find in Acts. And I can tell you, when I finally stepped back into, and it was interesting because I was faking being a Christian for so long that I actually ended up becoming one. But the premise is that basically, when I began to actually study the book of Acts, which was a requirement of the Bible discipleship I was in other words, there was a curriculum now. I'm in this Bible discipleship and there's a curriculum, and I have to study the book of Acts and I have to write papers about it. And all of a sudden, my reality was checked because the Christianity I knew, the Christianity I was in, which consequently was just straight up charismatic assemblies of God, baptism of the Holy Spirit, evidence of salvation through baptizing in the Holy Spirit, and evidence of that is the speaking in tongues. And if you don't do that, you're going to hell. Right? That was the premise. And so I read the book of Acts and I'm like, it's not the same. It's not the same. Whatever they're doing there looks more like when I was studying the Native American religion, or when I was studying the Wiccan religion, not Christianity that I know today. And it aggravated me. It bothered me. Because why? Because truth was checking me. Truth was checking me. Now, when I talk about truthfulness, for example, what somebody would call honesty, when I say getting honest with yourself, truth is, when I'm saying be truthful with yourself, I'm not telling you that you go and tell your deepest, darkest secret to the latest and greatest pastor. What I'm saying is, stop telling yourself everything's okay. Because even when I was in darkness, I knew things were not okay. But when I became a Christian, I tried to convince myself that my salvation that I had gained was enough to be okay. And that is absolute hogwash. Your brain doesn't work that way. Your reality doesn't work that way. And I'm going to tell you right now, your actual relationship with God does not work that way. So, original sin says that everybody is totally depraved. Now, there's variations on this, and I'm going to say that when I was full-blown 100%, Protestant, relatively Reformed Christian, I loved Calvinism. And my 5 points of Calvinism were the filter by which I put everything. Every bad thing that happened, every good thing that happened, the good people who I encountered, who was by my definition good, and those bad people who I encountered who were by my definition bad, and how everything worked in its dynamic, and total depravity was my first filter. Meaning what? Everybody's just totally incapable of doing good, not at all able to do anything other than evil. And I had scripture to back it up. I have this verse in Genesis chapter 8, right? Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. And the Lord smelled the sweet savor. The Lord said, I should say Yahweh. I shouldn't be saying Lord. Even for you Protestants' sake, I shouldn't be saying it. Yahweh said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, because the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike everything living as I have done. Boom. Evil in their heart from their youth. That was from their birth. That's what I said in my head. Do you see how I was lying to myself? It doesn't say youth. In fact, Na'ar means guy who's been bar mitzvahed, technically. Okay. Now, there are some exceptions. I mean, sometimes there's a reference to maybe late elementary school age, like maybe I don't know, fifth or sixth grade could potentially be a Na'ar. But the point, and this is important, is it's not birth. And it doesn't even say from birth. Never does it actually say from birth in the Hebrew. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we look at the covenant, the Noahic covenant, he's saying here, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. Now, in the Hebrew, it does not say man. In the Hebrew, it says Adam. Oh, wow. What's this? This is called a remez. This is a hint. I will no longer curse the ground for Adam's sake. When did that happen? During the fall, right? When he says, cursed is the ground for your sake, right? By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your bread. Meaning what? After the flood and through the rainbow promise, the rainbow covenant, no longer was it by the sweat of your brow would you eat your bread. Do you know how many Christians believe that by the sweat of their brow they're supposed to eat their bread? Do you know why? Because the Catholic Church, who was in power over the peasants of the king, who was in cahoots with the Pope until they got in a fight, and then all of a sudden it became the Anglican and the Catholic Church, but they had the same premise, the same agenda, told you by the sweat of your brow you eat your bread, that it is part of the will of God for you to actually be poor. In fact, they formed sects like the Franciscan sect that takes a vow of poverty, right? The Dominican sect. And so, of course they're going to teach that. Of course that's in the catechism. Of course that's in the confessions. But do you see where this turns into a real problem, especially for somebody who used to think about how to destroy Christianity, who used to think about how to rip religion apart because of the hypocrisy and lies and all the other stuff? What do I want for you? What do I actually want? Like if I had my way, what would happen with you? That you would awaken to the fact that you were never supposed to be in this subjected state, but that you are a son of Adam and therefore an heir to Adam's covenant. And Adam's covenant was never eliminated or overridden. That is a Protestant Christian doctrinal error that covenants get overridden by newer covenants. What a load of hogwash, and there is no evidence of that actually occurring except when we get into a misinterpretation of letters where Paul answers questions to specific churches about specific things. Letters we just conveniently, along with the other Hebrew and Aramaic manuscripts, no longer have. And so, Adam, no longer is the ground cursed for Adam's sake. Well, that's really intriguing now, isn't it? Because now we have just yet another element of reality present in this process. So now when we go back into the verse, when we say, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, because the imagine of man's heart. Let's go look at that. Imagination of man's heart. So if we go down to imagination of man's heart, we come again to Adam. So now let's talk about this for a minute. When we talk about a house or a clan, we do not say the sons of unless they are inferior to the clan leader. And so when it says speak to the sons of Israel, you need to understand Israel is the clan leader. Okay. Even though he was dead, he is still the clan leader. Now, there's a few reasons why that's important, because once you become an heir, you no longer are known as a son of, but are known by that name. That's why we don't call the people who are dwelling in that land right now, who claim to be the ones who belong there, Israelites or Israel. We don't say sons of Israel, because why? Because they have come to the maturity of being the actual steward of the household, and therefore heir or inheritor of the estate. And by that, then we understand they are no longer a bene, but they are actually the name. So when it says the whole house of Jacob, or the house of Jacob, or Jacob, it is not referring to the man anymore. And in this case, when it says that every imagination of Adam's heart is evil continually, how do we know that? Because Adam was already dead. So it's his heirs as Adam who are actually being the problem. Now, the reason I bring this up is because immediately Christianity and Judaism, for this matter, wants to assign mankind to this process. But what you need to understand is the mention of Adam's name without the words son, okay, have to do with the mechanism of inheritance. So when you are called a son of Adam, then you are an heir. But if you are called Adam, then you have inherited already, which means when we address someone in the state of a son, we are speaking to their potential. And when we address them as the name of the Father, we have spoken to their accomplishment. That's why Yahweh says to Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these dry bones live?" What does he respond? He responds, "Lord, you know." In other words, I have no clue. Can they? Right? And so what does he say? He says, "Speak to these dry bones." Who's that? That's not a son of Adam anymore. You get that? That is somebody who's operating in the dominion. Now, the reason this is important is because then when we get back to this verse and start to break it down a little bit more, and we see that this is every imagination of Adam's heart, then we know that we're talking about someone who is in control of the inheritance. What was the inheritance? Well, let's just go back to Genesis chapter 1. What was the actual inheritance in Genesis? What was it? It was in verse 26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the aretz, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the aretz." Okay, now we understand that the covenant was actually giving the entire universe, as it were, to Adam. Why? Because the word aretz does not mean what you think it means. It does not mean earth, as in this terrestrial ball, and it does definitely not mean any specific thing, except that it is that where you have ran. The word aretz has its root in the word chutz. Chutz. And chutz means to run, okay? So really, it's establishing the strength of the runner, which were messengers who carried pottery shards, which consequently is the ancient pictographic Hebrew representation of the word aretz, is literally where the king sends his messengers to give commands or to negotiate terms, right? Okay, so now what we need to do is go back to that verse, because remember, this is my core verse When I was a Calvinist, having already deconstructed Christianity, and I'm a Calvinist, lying to myself about what I've already deconstructed, trying to convince myself that because I heard God's voice, the pulpit is right. You see, when God told me about that homeless person, he never said that John MacArthur is the authority on doctrine of Scripture. Nor did he say that John Nelson Darby was the authority on prophecy. But I was convinced that that was probably true. And although that I had my roots in charismatic churches, I stepped into Reformation because of the level of hypocrisy and people acting. Do you know I would sit in a Pentecostal church? I would sit there and somebody would start doing their speaking in tongues thing, blah, 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 blah. And the person over here would go, blah, 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 and answer. And I would hear God say, they're both lying. And I'm like, this voice is getting on my nerves, right? I can't do anything without this voice telling me something. And so, of course, I was jaded by the hypocrisy, jaded by the deception, right? But why is it there? Because they want. I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna be very, very merciful here and say that probably some of the most blessed and great people in Christianity are the charismatics. And I'm going to say this. They're doing it because they want to experience the book of Acts, but they are missing two very important elements. The first is that they already have set an expectation that they can lose what they have, right? They don't have perseverance of the saints, which is the fifth element of Calvinism that says that if you are saved, you will always be saved, right? So they don't have that, and so they're constantly judging themselves and constantly condemning themselves and wondering whether they still have their salvation or not. There's a point in time where I was walking with God, and He said, "If you believe you can lose your salvation, now you have no other part with me." And I was like, I liked it better when we were talking about the bum. Right? Okay, so the premise is that basically what we have here is we have a list of essentials, and as long as those are met, and as long as we are convinced that it is true, we will be content to just leave the person alone, leave them in their sin, leave them in their darkness, leave them in their failures, leave them in their limiting beliefs, their wounds, and their entitlements, and never address it. But truth be told is that that part of Christianity is actually what has become the flood of deception within the religion that was intended to be such a liberty to you. Why? Because as you remember, when I was a Satanist, I would just give them the essentials and they'd go away. People bring me tracts. I'd say, "Oh yeah, that's great. No, I don't need that." And then they would be like, "Oh, you don't believe in God?" I'd say, "Oh yeah, sure, I believe in God." And they say, "Believe in Christ?" "Yep, I believe in Christ." "Yep. Christ and Him crucified." "Yep." I'm telling you, it was an absolute deception, and they bought it. So don't come at me with the idea that confessing an essential is some form of activation within the universe. Do you know what actually is an activation in the universe? Is when you imagine a fear and react to it and start planning for it. That's an activation. Let me tell you what's not. Saying the sinner's prayer. It's not. It's not. In fact, truth be told is that you have three elements of the sinner's prayer. You have the person saying it, the person guiding the person, and the actual mechanism behind it. Okay, so let's start with that. The person who's guiding the person, let's start with them. What are they doing? They're getting a notch under their belt because they were somehow convinced that when it says to go make disciples of themselves, baptizing them in the name of something, which consequently, just so you know, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit part is not present in all the manuscripts and probably was a later addition by the Catholic Church because of their Trinitarian element. I'll spare you the details on that. So now you have the person guiding, they're getting a notch under the belt. Yep, got another soul, right? And then you have the person saying the prayer believing that it's sufficient to seal the entire mechanism into place. And then there's the actual true mechanism. And what is that? That is that the person begins to believe that there's some sort of change coming. So the universe responds to that and says, sure, I'll provide you with change. You believe that you're changing? Yes, of course. We will give you all of the resources available to change your broken and sick, right? Because hope deferred makes the heart sick, right? Your hopeless and your distraught heart. We'll give you all the resources to begin to change that. Your cynicism, your wounds, your entitlements, your limiting beliefs, we'll give you those resources. But people go along and a number of things happen. Either A, they go and they make their first mistake after becoming a Christian, right? And now all of a sudden, depending on who they're with, I mean, whether it be, if it's a Pentecostal church, they'll probably leave and go and indulge in everything they possibly can, because obviously they're going to hell, right? If it's the perseverance of the saints side, then they will hide it and act like they're good. And they'll hide it and act like they're good enough to absolutely lie to themselves and say that they are. When truth be told is that there's no healing, there's no repair, there's no change. Now, another sad element of this, especially within the Darby dispensationalist group, right? The mainstream evangelicals who believe that some sort of wisping away of humans to prevent them from having to experience some judgment that's coming upon the earth is all they can really look forward to, or death itself. Here's another fun fact. Do you know that the whole idea behind it was that it was not a big deal for a peasant to die? You just replace him. All you got to do is see, oh, yep, on the books there, it says that that person doesn't exist, so we need to bring in another peasant and work them in the field here. So, of course, being dispensable is something that you would want to propagate. It's better on the other side, we promise. Oh, but not for you who don't listen to the king, you're going to hell. Oh, and for you who do not pay taxes on the herbs that you mix together for healing, we're going to call you a witch and burn you at stake. Right? And so you can see now where there is a interference from human beings in the religion that was supposed to be amazingly liberating for human beings. It's disgusting. It's aggravating. And we still see the propagation of it. We're called a Christian nation. You know what we are? We're a nation of slaves. We are a nation of people who don't think for themselves, a nation of people who just follow the leader, a nation who are told that they're free and therefore they believe that they're free, but they're actually not free at all. And in addition to all of that, when you start getting into what you can and can't do, we are a military state. We are actually forced into subjection to a list of morals and a list of doctrines and a list of legislation that is absolutely corrupt and is reflective of some of the behavior that King George did in the first place and why we delivered ourselves from that mess. And yet, that's not where we're at. Why? Because Christianity teaches you to blame somebody else. And that's the second point that I need to get to here. So first you're told you're evil no matter what. And the only way you can not be evil is to say these words, which I've also already proven to you are absolutely meaningless. I'm walking around working on controlling demons and saying those words to Christians and they walk away. Right? I'm studying rituals to conjure demons and I'm convincing people that I'm a Christian. Then came the time where all of a sudden, it became necessary to really pretend that that was true. And I found myself confronted, and I found my conscience not feeling very good about it. And that's when I began to move into mainstream Christianity. And of course, Calvinism was very logical. But what's the next thing on the list? Well, the next thing on the list is that you are taught to blame something else for any evil or darkness in your life. For example, and this is a good one, you hear a lot of Christians make kind of a joke about, oh, I almost lost my witness, right? Because somebody made them angry and they had an outburst. What's crazy about that is the amount of hypocrisy built into mainstream Christianity that's already present is why people are turned off, not because you curse. Now, I do my best for the sake of the people who will just turn off the video because their ears cannot handle it. I try not to curse on this channel, but I can tell you it is a part of my expression of who I am. And the irony is that people will get more worked up over a word said in an offensive way than they will in the fact that they have been tricked into staying in a state of poverty, of oppression, and of foolishness. The Trinity is an absolute foolish doctrine. Hell is a foolish doctrine. Now, blaming somebody else, right? That's the key here. Somebody else needs to change. I said at the beginning of this thing, what is the main or what is the greatest thing that prevents you from your success? And I said, I promise you, you're going to blame it on a circumstance or on a person that has wounded you. And so now you can't do the thing, right? Now, there's a couple very important points I want to bring forward. But one of the key ones I want to bring forward is that if you believe that people are totally depraved and you believe that you are not the one who is responsible for the darkness in this world, then guess what? You will never succeed. Why? Because the responsibility, the ability to respond correctly to a circumstance is present in those who have actualized and no longer believe that they're evil. They've healed. Because who told you you were naked? Who told you you were evil? The Bible doesn't. And I'm about to prove that to you. I'm about to show you the action of mercy present in this process. That after the flood, God says, I'll never do it again. I will never destroy the world with a flood again. But what people go is, oh, well, next time he's going to do it with fire. Well, if that's what you want, yeah, sure, maybe. Because you know what? If you all continue to careen yourselves towards a hell that doesn't exist, I'm sure that hell might accommodate you. And what I mean by that is if there was any actual existence of hell, it's a result of your imagination and a manifestation through the universe who's trying to be obedient to all of you. There might actually something come to pass like that. But if you could get in your head that when a prophet comes and warns a people and predicts the future of that people, if they do not repent, it has nothing to do with a guarantee. It does not, these people, I have heard from the pulpit, watch this. Jonah went down to Nineveh to warn Nineveh that they would be destroyed. And then they repented. But 500 years it was destroyed anyways because they must not have stayed repentant. Idiots. Okay, let's just check something really quick because I think it's one of the most important mechanisms of this reality. And in its simplicity, it goes something like this. He made him who knew no sin, to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. In other words, an imputation of whatever it was that happened. Now, when I say he made him who knew no sin to become sin, I don't completely understand that dynamic. And if you cornered me, I might not be able to explain it. But what I can do is say that he made him who knew no sin to become sin for me, that I might become something else. And in the interest of becoming something, righteousness is a pretty cool thing, right? But let's just take this back a step. So Abraham walks into Gerar, which is consequently one of the most powerful nations at that time, the Philistine nation. And Gerar is actually kind of the capital city of the other city-states in the Philistine Empire. Not governed necessarily by Abimelech, but definitely Abimelech is king of Gerar. Okay? So Abraham goes to Gerar because of a famine. Okay? Remember, a nomadic follows the food. That's important. A nomadic follows the resources. If it's scarce here, they don't say, Lord, if it be your will, could you please bring some food? No, they go find the food, right? So anyways, they march into Gerar. And of course, you know the story that he deceives Abimelech by saying that, you know, Sarah was his sister when really it was like his half-sister or something like that. But the truth be told is it really doesn't matter, because in the end, the mechanism is that God comes to Abimelech at night and says, you're dead. Why am I dead? Will you destroy a righteous nation? Okay, how do we go from you're dead to destroy a righteous nation? I don't know, and I don't really care, because this man just told the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a perceivable God in his dream that his nation was righteous. And that if he died, it would destroy them, understanding his position as leader. Which consequently, he must have been a good one, because nobody cooed him. He was actually involved in Isaac's life as well, years later. Right now, Abraham doesn't even have Isaac. But the premise is that he sits there and he says, will you destroy a righteous nation? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if you tell the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a perceivable God that you are righteous, you better have the definition of righteous correct, and you better have the merit by which that righteousness is there available in your repertoire of information, because the measure by which you think righteousness exists is not within anything that you do right or wrong, but within he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, and we become the righteousness of God. You say, wait a minute, that's the Old Testament, this is the New Testament. Okay, but retroactively, that is what occurred. How do we know that? Because the Lamb was slain from the foundations of the earth. Okay, so now Abimelech tells God, will you destroy a righteous nation? Meaning what? He understood the meritlessness of Christ. Prove me wrong. And so now, what do we know? We know that the function of righteousness is not present within that mechanism. But here's the crazy part about it, is you were told that you were evil. You were told that that it's something else's fault. Whose? The devil's, right? This thing that's equal and opposite to God, this thing that is actually supposedly the light, this thing that is actually a deceiver, and yet we can never find it not telling the truth, and this thing that has absolutely been the scapegoat of every single vice you have ever secretly never admitted to another human being that you practice. Oh, the devil got to me again. What? No, your wounds from your trigger where you still have not healed from your ex-wife, and now your current wife is interacting with you and the devil is actually who got you. No, you not healing from that other relationship and now are being triggered by someone who absolutely loves you. Which makes you the devil, really, for not healing. The word Satan, not the name, that's a Christian thing, by the way. The word Satan itself is actually just meaning that something is adversarial to a process. In other words, the resistance of a process. That's what it means. And so when we talk about Satan, we're talking about something that resists the process. Let me give an example. When Balaam is on his donkey and his donkey is acting stupid, when the donkey is actually trying to go down the path and can't go down the path, what's there? The angel of the Lord, which is somehow some fourth person of the Trinity in essence, in equality, and all the other stuff that you put into the Trinity doctrine, because that's actually what is given prominence in that specific entity, stands as Satan in the Hebrew in Balaam's path and seeks to kill him. Okay, we won't go too much further into that, but I can tell you that you probably need to restructure your thoughts about Satan. Now, here's the intrigue. What we really need to get into here is this word imagination, okay? Imagination. So going back into our verse in Genesis chapter 8, we have this word imagination, which is yetzer. Yetzer, okay? Yetzer is a form or framing or framework. Now, rabbis working with sheeple, because people don't want to be rabbis, they want rabbis to do the work, actually do say that this is a desire. They say this is the desire, right? In fact, they call it the Yetzer Hara, or the evil inclination. But the truth is that this is a framework, and this is framing. In fact, if we go into the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we might discover something special about this word. Let's go do that. Why do we go back into the ancient pictographic Hebrew? Because the modern Hebrew actually does not get the justice of the story behind the word. That is the problem. The problem is that everything has a story, and every Hebrew word has a story. And in this case, this particular Hebrew word, which is yatzar, to mold or give shape to or press or squeeze, as when pressing clay into the shape of a form of a vessel. But then it also is a thought, the forming of ideas with the mind, right? But going back to the parent root here in the beginning, we will find that this is not really the case. So we have Sadi Resh, okay? And what we see is that the pictograph, you see right there in the yellow, definition is not present. So we probably need to check on that. But then it says a pressing in or on someone or something. So it's kind of a pressure, or in this case, something narrow to squeeze through, but a pressing in nonetheless. Persecution, right? To agitate mentally or to spiritually worry, right? Now we can get into this a little bit further, and I will explain why Sadi Resh is what it is. But in general, we can see that it carries this idea of pressure. For example, a balm is made from pressing, right? And a balm is used by pressing it into the skin, okay? And then we have straight as in something narrow, right? Closed in upon you. Think claustrophobia, right? Or pressing in. Then a bundle that's fastened together and compressed through the binding, right? To be bound up tightly. Storing in the sense of something being bound and then placed on a shelf, right? And then a waistcloth as something that wraps around and compresses the waist. A storehouse in the sense of things that are bound, where grain is bound and placed in a storehouse. The back of the neck or the nape of the neck that always gets tight, right? Okay, and then we have olives, right? Look at this, sahar. The olives are pressed to extract the glimmering oil. So sahar is actually the idea of pressing out oil, right? Okay, and then we have, oh, by the way, and that word sahar also means the glimmering of the oil. So it's something that has been extracted through pressure and now glimmers. There's important words there because sahar actually means to have splendor or to glisten, and that's what we have here. It's sohar, right? Sohar, the emitting or reflecting of light from the glisten of olive oil, something that shines brightly, also known as the brightest part of the day. Okay. And then we have crushed, we have flint, right? Which are tools for striking or pressing the edges of the tool will create that sharp edge. Sore, as in a boulder. This is the rock that was struck. Okay. And then sora is features or a sense of being pressed together or chiseled out, as it were. A wound, as in a pressing into a city for conquering, right? And then, of course, rampart is a defensible stronghold. This is where we get the idea of metzora. And then being pressed in a narrow, tight place, the pressing of clay to form something is our word yetzar, which means what? Something formed it. Now, if you're a Calvinist, you say, well, truth be told, is that God unconditionally elected a certain amount of humans to be saved and the rest are not. And then they go on and say, because of that, Christ only died for those elect. He didn't die for the whole world. He didn't die for everyone. He didn't offer that gift to everyone because some were created for perdition. Some were created to go to hell. Okay. So if you ever meet a Calvinist and it's legal to do in that country, slap them because they really don't get it. That if the intensification of all power in the universe in any way, shape, or form acted like that, he's malevolent according to most tests of malevolency. Now, it's important, like I said, if it's legal in the country, otherwise don't slap them. But the premise is, and if you want to go back in time and slap me, that's cool. But the premise is what we really need to grasp here is that a forming is the result of a mold. And that mold is the result of something trying to form it. Now, Calvinism says that if you are totally depraved, that you were formed totally depraved, that God created you that way. Oh boy, does that put a smack doodle on Adam and Eve being perfect in the garden. In fact, there really is nothing that ever says that Adam and Eve were perfect. And I've always tried to figure out, if they were eating fruits, nuts, and berries, what kind of stomach aches they had. That definitely wasn't perfect. But anyway, so the premise is that basically what we are encountering here is a statement that says that it's a forming that occurs. Now, if we go back into our verse in chapter 8 of Genesis, what we encounter is the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Well, I've already taught you that evil is a twisted head. Let's recap. So recall that the Hebrew word for evil is ra. Okay? It is pronounced R A W H. Ra. Okay? And it is not the Egyptian god. Okay? It is actually defined as evil, or if you have a nice liberal version of the Bible, it is calamity. Okay? Okay. Calamity. And let's see what the actual ancient pictographic Hebrew says. It says that this is what? This is the drawing of a human being's head. And this is actually how it was drawn on. I like to do this right here. And by the way, this is no relation to anybody that you think you know. But I like to put the eye in the mouth. But in the original, it didn't have the eye in the mouth. It actually just had that right there. in some form. And then it had what? It had this, or it had, and again, no relation to anybody you know. I don't want any, people saying that I'm drawing their relative or whatever. All right, and here we go. All right, so it had that or that. Now, let me tell you, if it was this on pottery, is that a Freudian slip? I don't know. Okay, so here we go. If it was that on pottery, then this is actually what it is. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's that word right there. That's right. The word ra, spelled like this in the Hebrew, is interpreted in, well, you know what? It's better if I just show you. Let me just show you. Let's do that. Okay. Psalm 23. Psalm 23, verse 1. Oh, that's Psalm. I'm sorry. Psalm 23. Okay, let's get it together. Here we go. Boop. All right, here we go. Into the Hebrew, and boom. So first thing you need to know is that this yod right here, okay, is actually a possessive suffix showing first person, okay? Which means what? It is a subjective version of I, meaning what? My. Okay, so a possessive subjective version of I would be my. Lord is my shepherd, but look at this. Look at this word right here. Okay. Now, what I want you to understand, there's actually no vowel points. There's no vowel points. We'll get to that in a minute. But if we jump into this, you see it comes from the root ra'ah, right? To means pasture or tend or graze or feed. But it's actually coming from, see if I can just get there by going this way. I may not be able to. We'll see. Yep, there we go. Okay, and so the premise is that there are variations of this lettering, but this is what I want you to see. That it is the word friend right here, okay? Friend. And the reason I want you to see that is because that right there is the word raw, right? Okay, so what I want you to think about is why. Well, it's because man watches over his friend. So here's man, right? And he's watching. Okay, let's do this correctly. Let's do this. Let's do some actual, like, really cool scientific diagramming here and go like this. He's actually watching. Whoops. Okay, hold on. What do we need? We need this one. There we go. Okay. He's actually watching his friend. Okay, that didn't work. I thought I could do a dotted line, but I guess I just have this very primitive thing going on, which is like annoying at times, but it'll work here. We'll do it this way. He's watching his friend, right? But this one here is definitely not watching his friend. Instead, his brain has turned to what? Mush, spaghetti, right? There we go. That kind of looks like somebody who's wounded for sure. Okay, so now what I want you to think about is the concept that if I was to show you this verse in Genesis and we come up with the exact same word, then something has happened, and that's going to be important here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just throw that part under the bus really quick in Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. And we are going to be here, okay? And we go into that word evil, which is after the word imagination of his heart, and we arrive at Ra. Evil, bad. Okay, So the question is what happened? Well, there was originally a 23rd letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, that was known as the twisted rope. So let's go take a look at that real quick. So what do we have here? We have the, oh, that was neat. I actually changed the color there. Okay. So at any rate, what we have here is we have the twisted rope. And the concept is that this literally said head twists. That is the word raw. That, oh, did I say evid? That's really interesting. Let's get rid of that D and let's make that an L. But the premise here, and I think it is important that we don't miss it, is that evil, as we understand it, what do we do with evil? We say malevolence, right? What we're trying to really indicate when we say evil is something really bad and uncomfortable and contrary to everything you believe about things that are good, right? The knowledge of good and evil is something to do with what we perceive to be good, which really we could probably categorize as pleasurable, comfortable, and non-invasive, okay? And probably calming, I think we could probably squeeze in there. But then evil is the opposite of that. Chaotic, pain in the neck, the whole bit. But truth be told is that what evil says is that the head twisted. The head twisted something. Now, remember at the beginning, I said that we delete, distort, and generalize information as it's brought into our skull. What you need to understand is that when you experience a wound, which you will because we're dealing with wounded humans who won't stop wounding each other, and so every generation creates a new set of wounds because we refuse to heal. You have no idea. You have no idea how you treat your children because of your wounds. You have no idea how you treat your spouse because of your wounds, how you treat your animals because of your wounds. So in principle, the way that I want you to begin to start changing how you think about it and what you think about it is I want you to stop thinking that it's some sort of malevolence that's not present outside of humanity. What I mean by that is if we want to talk about evil, one of the things we need to know is that there really isn't a place in history of mankind where we can identify evil just forming out of nothing. What we find is we find humans actually doing actions that violate not only the rights, but also the comfort and the pleasure of other humans. In other words, they take away the life, liberty, and happiness, right? Or let me rephrase that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Intriguing that we say the pursuit of happiness, but that's a whole nother teaching. But okay, so now what we need to do is say, okay, so the first thing is you're told that you're evil from the beginning, but of course this is saying, no, actually you're not evil from the beginning. You start to get evil around the Na'ar age, which is when childhood program really starts to happen. Okay. Because what's interesting is that you do not really retain a whole lot of memory as you go back into your toddler years. Now, there are some who do. I mean, I remember when I was 18 months old, and I remember a lot of memories from then vividly. But the premise is that's about how far back I can go. But there are people who can remember all the way back to the womb, which would be another story altogether. Those people probably need to be the ones running Microsoft and instead of people who want to, make clouds to block out the sun because of some weird thing that the sun does. Anyway, so the point being is that when we start getting our minds wrapped around the idea that this is a framework, that this is a framing, that there is a filter by which you're looking at reality, and we start to really, really get our minds wrapped around the idea that this is not total depravity. This is not that you're born in sin. Do you know The irony is that they get that from Psalm 139, where David says he was born in sin. But if you look into Talmud and you look into other Jewish folklore, you'll find that he was actually born of a prostitute, or at least of, what is it, an Alma, I think it's called. Anyway, somebody who is not actually married to Jesse. Okay. All right. Now, you're told that everything's evil, that everybody's evil, that everything's malevolent, blah, 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 blah. And you think that you're going to somehow live your life in some light. You believe that you're going to somehow live your life in some sort of hope. You believe you're going to live your life in some sort of prosperity or enjoyment or happiness. And truth be told, is if everything's evil, you're screwed. And so truth be told, if you're a Christian, just give up. Because it's never going to get better. And I'm going to tell you why. Because you believe that you need to save this world. Do you know what I need to do? I need to go out and I need to heal this world like my Messiah did. Do you know what he did? He would go into a city, right? Would he go into the city and he'd say, repent because you are going to hell because you were born dead and you were born evil. No, he went into places like the Decapolis, which, do your research on that one, right? And what? Healed the sick, the infirm, right? The lame walked, the blind saw, the deaf heard, the mute spoke, and never was there a track passed out. Ever. And so you can imagine the disgust of your Messiah, who you will give a tract to somebody sitting in a wheelchair. You will give a tract to somebody who is blind, and it'll have Braille on it. The nerve. The nerve. So now you understand, if you really believe that the outcome of this world is destruction, and you really believe that everybody in the world is evil but you, I got news for you. You are the one who is evil. Very, very darkly evil. Because you really actually are not looking out for the other. And you really actually are not believing in the potential of the other. You have no idea how I wanted to burn this world to the ground when I was a Satanist because of that fact. Because this world has been taken over by a religion that was formed in 325 AD and has nothing to do with the Bible. It had to do with a political move to subject the people, to get them to be in unity under the rulership of Rome, because they were running out of money to send armies in and suppress rebellions after they fought Israel for as long as they did. That's right. The campaign against the Holy Land was very expensive. And the second runner-up was Britain. The people of that land gave them a pretty good fight. But Rome figured out a way to manipulate the people into believing that they were in a certain state, and then made them believe that that's actually what God wanted, and then convinced everybody that that was true. And when people who were royalty started to flex, it was easy to go along with that game, right? You're a king, you come down from the north and start conquering everything around you, and you start handing out bags of dirt to your friends and saying, here you go, that's your land over there, when it was somebody else's land. Well, that's nothing new. But anyways, point being is that here's this land for you, and you go do this thing, and you make these people work for you and bring me tribute. Of course you're going to propagate a religion that tells you that you should be in poverty, that you are nothing other than a worker, and that's cool until you die, but at least you're not going to go burn for the rest of eternity. How convenient. So if you believe this world is going to be destroyed and you believe that it is evil and you believe that you were born evil and that you need to say a few words to get that straight. And once you get that straight, then everything's hunky-dory. Then guess what? It is going to be a very bad life for you. And I'm going to just throw out there that it's probably already been a bad life and you've been lying to yourself and saying that it can't get any better. And I wouldn't even go there a step further and say that while you're doing that, you're dragging your entire family through that destruction. Because the self-condemnation, the lack of understanding of mercy and grace, and all the other hogwash that's been built into a system to control you, to keep you from being who you really are, which is a God, Elohim, right? Psalm 82, thank you very much. And your Messiah also said that at Hanukkah, which consequently he was celebrating. Why don't you? And then I'm going to take it a step further and say this. You blame it all on an entity that is never declared to be the enemy of God, but you were declared to be the enemy of God. You keep trying to convince yourself that the goodness of God is actually not present within you, and then you try to do good. Do you see that paradox? You are totally depraved, bound to a birthright original sin. And the truth is that accepting Christ doesn't fix that. It just makes a pad for it to be under. And then you really don't have any hope or anything to look forward to until you're dead. But at least when you're dead, you're not going to go to that fire. And you think for a second that you can function as a human being. You've convinced yourself that because you have a job, because you have your own vehicle, because you have your own home, because you have children. I love the ones that think because they have their children that they're righteous, because you have a dog, or because you have some land, or because you do this thing over here, and you pray and you celebrate Christmas and you honor him at Easter, that everything's hunky-dory, when truth is the level of darkness within you is just building, and soon, very soon, is going to explode in a tirade of vice, outbursts, addictions, negative behavior in general. And when the ego gets its rule, you'll just feel great. Because why? Because you are saved. Now, my camera has a tendency to edit out when I make a raspberry, but I'm going to try here. It's garbage. It's all garbage. It is not in your scripture, and it is not structured that way. It was designed by leaders of organizations who want you to behave, who want you to be governed, who want you to give them money because it gives them power or a sense thereof. When truth be told, you are declared to be something way more than what they ever will be, because really what that's going on with them is they're operating within their wounds, entitlements, limiting beliefs, and a lack of imagination. Do you know why people seek power? It's because they're terrified of it. They're terrified of someone else controlling them. That's why they seek power. But now we're going to get into something interesting. I love the human beings who stand in the pulpit and they hold up their phone and they say, "This is a God." This, right? They say, "This is an idol." Okay? They say, "You worship this, you put your time into it, blah, 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 blah," right? The people who condemn other people for vices that they have. We'll say, well, that person just doesn't have self-control. Or the person who will come along and say, you know, anybody who was a Michael Jackson fan was an idolater. Or somebody will come along and say that TV, right? I used to love it. When I was a Christian, I called the TV the Babylonian idiot box, which I coined from David Wilkerson, who consequently did a really good job of condemning America in the book, The Destiny of America, I believe it's called. Anyways, the point being is that he really believed that that thing was of the devil. And I love the fact that truth be told, all of these things are tools. And guess what? You're blaming them again. You are still blaming the damage of the world on something else. You pastors who are standing in the pulpit with your phone saying this is an idol, most likely is because you can't go to bed without looking at something on here you shouldn't be looking at. And truth be told is that in all of that process, I'm willing to bet that there is some sort of rift between you and other people because of it. One you're not willing to admit, one you're not willing to get your mind wrapped around because you are still convinced that everybody's evil and you need to save them. It's a tool. And I'm going to tell you right now what I love about this thing right here. This right here is an exposure of the heart. If you want to know the exposure of the heart, what I want you to do is I want you to go look at your internet history versus what's not in the internet history that you already erased. And the other thing I want you to think about is if your significant other or one of your parishioners, or say maybe your child, got a hold of your device and began to look at the apps that are open, what would they find? What have you been looking at? What have you been consuming, right? So then this is the crazy part about this is it makes it sound like I'm saying that this thing is evil, but I'm also kind of indicating that that's all you use it for. But the truth is that here's how this works. Your heart controls this mechanism, okay? But what I want you to understand is that's because it was already present. I'm going to show you this now. This is the thing called the easy button, okay? So the easy button is basically kind of a thing that basically gives me an understanding in my life of the truth about my reality, okay? Because I was told by the pulpit something totally different. And this is going to be in 2 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 3. Seeing that his divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness. Stop. Now, first and foremost, if you want to understand power, you need to stop thinking something you can lord over people, and you need to start thinking energy, and you need to start thinking what that actually affects, how and why. Because truth be told is that power has nothing to do with authority, and power has nothing to do with the ability to move something else. And what I mean by that is that authority is permission to move something else. That's it. That's all authority is. Authority is the ability to move a person or cause a person to do a thing which is still moving. Okay, and so the way that I want you to think about this is that power is more the essence or the core of the reality that does not follow the natural order processes of nature. Power gives you the ability to walk on water. Okay? Power gave Peter the ability to heal the man in the temple. Now, did Yeshua send the disciples out and say, go out and pray that God will heal these people? No, he said, go heal the sick. Go ye forth healing the sick. Right? He sends them out and he says, go do this thing. Now, granted, it also says that he gave them authority to cast out demons, blah, 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 blah. But understand that anything that tweaks the natural order processes of things, for example, the disease that would cause somebody to be lame from birth, like this man in the temple, is a natural order process. Cancer is a natural order process. Being born is a natural order process. The growing of trees is a natural order process. So if you do something to alter that, you are using power. Because that's the only thing that could mess with the fabric of reality. So when it says you have been given, or the divine power has given you everything that pertains to life and godliness, without getting into the nuances of those semantics, we have to grasp the understanding that we have been granted power. Okay? And that is for life and godliness. Now, watch this. If there is one thing I have learned about reality, is that everything wants to be in a state of equilibrium. For example, homeostasis, where the body is constantly regulating the balance levels of chemicals. Okay? Hydrostatic equilibrium, where the world itself, riding on plates, are actually staying in equilibrium with each other due to the way in which water wants to just settle a certain way. Fluid wants to settle a certain way. You will notice that if you spill water on a table and that table has a little bit of angle to it, it will flow down onto the floor and puddle on the floor. And if the floor has an angle, it'll go out across the floor. But if the table's perfectly level, the water will puddle outward in every direction, as easy as it is as far as resistance, friction from the table, etc. It probably eventually would pour down off the table if you continued to add to it, but generally speaking, you have a puddle, and it has spread itself as far as it possibly can in every direction according to its volume in a flat manner whose thickness is based upon the viscosity of the water. What's my point? My point is that hydrostatic equilibrium is a natural order process designed to create balance. Homeostasis is a natural order process designed to create balance. Equilibrium in your ears with your little rocks that roll around is a natural order process to create balance. So it would stand to reason that if Paul says that everything that has been made is telling us about the divine power, then one could argue that the divine power is seeking a balance. Now, I am about to again attack the sacred and tell you that there has to be a balance of this life and godliness using the dunamis. And that is the opposite. Death, right? And ungodliness using the same power. You say, what? No. Yes. And I'll tell you why. Because you need the ability to fail in such a way that you would need to correct it. Now, I know this sounds off the wall, but the truth be told is that I've already proven to you last week that there is actually an enhancement of the ego during this season intentionally to drive you towards humility, to create an opportunity for you to pull yourself down off your high horse, for you to pull yourself down off your throne, for you to pull yourself down and take a knee in front of the king. That's the premise, right? Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he'll raise you up to a position of honor. Done. Okay. So the premise is that if we've been given everything that pertains to life and godliness, we've also been given everything that pertains to death and ungodliness. Why? Because if you haven't noticed, your choices are sovereign in your life. You see, what you have lied to yourself in believing is that an external locus of control is necessary for you to succeed. Let me prove this to you. Why do we have speed limits? We have speed limits because A, we have determined that a person will not intentionally try to regulate their speed sufficient enough to be safe. Okay? And we've also determined that there's a certain amount of length of vehicle or a certain amount of distance that needs to be between you and the other vehicle based upon a certain amount of speed by which you can apply brakes and safely stop. And that's even more important when we start to get into a neighborhood where your stupid brain thinks you can go fast, where children are running out into the street. And so there's an estimation that you could probably not kill the kid if you're only going 25 miles an hour and can hit the brakes. Whereas if you're going 45, which is what you all usually do, going through a residential neighborhood, then yes, you're probably going to kill the kid. So that's why we have speed limits, is because we ourselves believe we need an external locus of control to regulate how fast we should go with our vehicle, because if we didn't, we would probably be dangerous. But who told you you needed the speed limit? Who told you that you don't have that control, that you don't have that decency, that you don't have that morality? And here's the irony is that we see the 35 sign and we're going put down the road and we're thinking, man, we can go faster than this. Come on. Really? Until the kid runs out in front of me and kill him. But the point being is that when we see the sign, we think we can go faster. I know I do. I think, well, I can probably go 8 over before they pull me over, right? But the concept is that the reason why is because we were told that we needed it. We were told we can't be trusted. You can't be trusted with your vehicle to drive it through a neighborhood where you will be safe. But you know what? Maybe that's true. But again, that's just a tool and it's a heart. And that's the part that you need to understand. We have been given everything that pertains to death and ungodliness by that frame. Okay? Now, it is very important for you to understand that I'm not saying, remember, I went through a whole tirade here of saying that original sin and total depravity are very inappropriate interpretations of this verse. And I further went on to say that what we don't know about this verse is hurting us, right? But now what I want you to get your mind wrapped around, because this is a continuation of last week in concerning how you operate, think about, and relate to God. You see, this is what it says. In fact, let me go ahead and go there. This is going to be in Romans. Of course, you guys know which verse, you guys know which chapter. I mean, anybody who knows me knows I'm going to go to Romans 8 a lot, okay? All right, here we go. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Messiah Yeshua, who don't walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. So let's go back to that now. What do we got here? We've got don't walk according to the flesh, ego, right? But walk according to the Spirit, the intuition that is actually the Father, right? Yahweh, who is you. You as an emanation of God, and that higher self is walking according to the Spirit, not some weirdo speaking in tongues. Okay. Walking according to the Spirit is following the intuition of the divine self instead of stroking the ego that was designed to preserve, to propagate, and to preserve and propagate, which boils down to three instincts. Let me tell you what your ego does. Looks out for number one, which is you, making sure that you yourself don't die. And here's the interesting thing about it is the whole idea behind it is to make sure you don't die long enough to reproduce, to preserve the species, right? Second is that it requires connectivity. Your ego will tend towards some sort of thing where you are validated through related processes. In other words, as long as the ego is given a belief that it is correct in its operations by someone else, connection, then it will not be in turmoil. And finally, of course, we have reproduction, which I don't need to get into, but you understand what is required for reproduction and understand that the ego is in charge of trying to make sure that that happens regardless of morals and values. Okay? So now the premise is that in that process, the ego is going to make sure that you're fed, make sure that you have a nice, pleasurable release, make sure that you have good access to your vices because God knows the light is a little bit too burdensome to receive, and etc. Now, is the ego evil? No. Again, it is a tool that is used by a heart that has some sort of framework that's evil, which is what? A twisted head, which means what? We've had some sort of deletion, distortion, and generalization of information that has come in. And in this case, it's somebody who has wounded somebody else, or it is some sort of circumstance that has caused you to become gunshot, so to speak. Now, the relevance and the reason for this information is because once you start to get your mind wrapped around this, you will understand that the framework is actually what's controlling the mechanism of the ego. So when we talk about the flesh, we're talking about the ego, which is those three instincts in operation with some sort of wounded heart, right? Because the ego itself is not evil. Your hungers are not evil, okay? Your hungers are not evil. What you perceive about how to accomplish getting those hungers taken care of can be evil. And what I mean by malevolence, which is a violation of someone else's right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, protection, etc. And it doesn't need to be a violation in the sense of just absolute force and stealing and taking and raping and all that. It can be manipulation. It can be talking to someone into selling their business to you when you know you're going to make an exorbitant amount of money and they could have too, right? That kind of thing. All right, so now here we go. For the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua made me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do in that it was weak in the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin he condemned sin in the flesh. Okay? Watch this now. Now that the ordinance of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk after the flesh, but after the Spirit. So what does that mean? That means you cannot keep Torah with the ego. And if you do, you will reap corruption. In other words, if you try to pretend like you are, like I was pretending like I was a Christian when I was dabbling in darkness, you are lying to yourself and believing that you're actually keeping a commandment when you're not. Because the keeping and protection of Torah has to do with the zeal and passion and love for it to begin with, because it is the gift from the giver whom you are already in love with, because that's what you were designed to do, because you are actually the bride of that entity in the sense of its connection to giving and you receiving. Meaning what? Meaning the only way in which we can do good, the only way in which we can honor Torah, the only way that we can actually keep the commandments is through the higher self. The ego cannot do it. So what's interesting is that if you keep the Sabbath, it was because of the higher self, which is proof of the higher self, which consequently means that you are actually an Elohim. That's right. The only reason you can keep a commandment, which is the Torah, which is from the mouth of God in the first place, is if you were and are an Elohim. Because the Torah is a creative process. It is the reason why the universe exists in the first place. Let there be light is Torah. Let the sea bring forth swimming things and the Tanim, which consequently are the dragons, but that's another story. Let the sea bring forth those things. That is Torah. Let us make man in our image. That is Torah. The Torah created the heavens and the earth. And therefore, you need to understand that if that be true, you're actually experiencing the mouth of God, which consequently we know is an energy, not actually something with lips in some cosmic throne in some universe that we don't understand. So where this becomes important is to understand that when we see things like, for example, vice, or we see things like, for example, abuse, you need to understand that that is actually an inclination of the heart as a result of a wound. Because really, a twisted head is just something that has been given bad information and it believed it. And the framework is that deletion, distortion, and generalization stored using neuropeptides to seal it into your brain and information into your subconscious. Because truth be told is that your entire reality is governed by your subconscious, and only 5% is actually a conscious choice. For example, try to think about your heart not beating. Just think that. Try to make your heart stop beating by thinking it. You can't. You can't. But you can consciously make a choice not to breathe. But truth be told is try to think about not breathing. You see, you can actually close your mouth and hold your breath, but you can't make yourself stop breathing. Every time you speak, every time you move, every time you do what you do, you need oxygen, and so therefore you breathe. And what's crazy is that you'll take those breaths even when you don't want to. You can only hold your breath for so long, and that's willpower, and that's that 5%. Unfortunately, that willpower is probably the biggest problem here. So when we are working with the model of our relationship with God, we need to understand that we're beginning with a framework that does not relate to Him, and then we have this really, really, really horrible religion telling us that we're evil to begin with, and we have this really, really horrible religion saying that we can blame all of our mistakes and problems and foolishness and darkness in the world upon a single entity that is not you. So what's the solution? A, you need to restructure your framework. You need to tweak it. You need to change that operation. It is not an inclination. That again indicates that it is some sort of sinister, innate, built-in system. It's not. It's a learned behavior. And it's a result of wounded people guiding wounded people, the blind leading the blind. And the context or the idea here is that one of the things you need to do is stop believing that this world is evil, because that means you're evil. And don't think that you lying to yourself, like I lied to Christians by saying the essentials, is sufficient. Pew sitting is not sufficient. Decorating a phallic symbol with golden testicles and silver semen is not sufficient. Renaming it as the tree in the sense of a cross and hanging nails on it is not sufficient. Oh, I'm going to really step on some toes now. Eating matzah in springtime with horseradish and lamb is not sufficient. That's right. This world is not evil. The wounds that we refuse to heal from are, and they're continuing to do damage. And Yahweh, blessed be his name, made a way for you to not have to go through this by taking away the merit of any of your behavior as being a condition upon how he would put you in a position. And in addition to that, connecting you to the level of equality in which the only thing that you're not is 100% light. He gave his bride absolute sovereignty so that she could choose him for the right reason. And then he gave the opportunity for her to go completely corrupt in order for her to realize that that's actually all she really wants, is to receive from him. And she would choose him without any gift present. That she would actually say, you know what? I want you on the merit of who you are, not what you will give to me. And then he will give her everything. And then he created an entire universe of mechanized natural order processes that are all obedient to her. In other words, she's queen. And here's the irony. The ego is just her refusing the light. That's it. That's all it is. It is that way from the 99% light, 1% darkness, all the way down to the 100% darkness. It is just a belief that you provide, that you protect, and that you instruct yourself. That's it. It is so insanely simple. And that's why I say, stop deceiving yourself into believing that you actually earn your paycheck. Okay? That doesn't mean that you stop going to work, but you should probably work towards not having a boss. I will tell you that. But the premise is that, because I mean, every one of Yeshua's parables, we really weren't working with people who were hired. We were working with people who were hiring people. We were working with people who were the boss, not the stewards. The parable was about the stewards, but you notice they were under a boss. Why was that important? Because generally speaking, Jews believe in cottage industry and or business ownership over wages. And generally speaking, that's what Torah communicated to them. When I say generally speaking, I mean some of it's tradition. But I want you to understand that when it says you're going to be the head and not the tail, that doesn't mean that you're going to be earning a wage. So when Deuteronomy 28 applies to you in the first 14 verses, guess what? You will probably not be in that state. But your belief that you're producing that which you wear, that which you eat, and that which you drink, Yeshua said where those come from when he said that, look what's happening to the lily of the field, look what's happening to the bird of the air, the swallow, right? So when you start to understand that it is your ego that believes that you're doing these things, therefore you realize that what your fears are is that you won't be able to continue because you're just not good enough, because you were told that you're not good enough. Because inherently, if you tell somebody that the world is evil and that a Christian is saved and is good, and you don't act like a Christian according to their definitions, then you must be evil. So your failures become a ticket to hell, or your failures become what? A process in which you must have never been saved. Do you see the darkness of this doctrine? And then, since that's true, we can't really say that it's actually us because that would be bad. So what we do is we assign it to some entity instead of realizing that the only mention of enemies of God in the Bible is when it says we are enemies of God in Romans 5 and in Romans 8. So you need to stop believing that you provide, protect, and instruct yourself. You need to start believing that that instruction comes from the intuition, that provision comes from the intuition, that protection comes from the intuition in which something is guiding you to a certain state. When you have things happen, like where you are sitting in the car and you're like, I don't know why, but I feel like I need to go back inside. And you go back inside before you drive away. You go back inside and you're looking around the house trying to figure out why you're doing that, and you can't figure it out. So you go back, sit in the car, and you drive away, and you missed the pile up on I-95. Intuition. Now, the people who were in the pile up, did they miss their intuition? Now you kind of might say they did, right? You might say that they may have been warned. Now, hearing that voice, I can tell you, is a difficult one. It took me a lot of work when I was very young to really kind of figure out what that voice was and how it worked in its dynamics. But I can tell you that if you will open yourself to that reality, that you are Yahweh, and so your brain is actually going to operate in or like him, then those intuitions actually become the omniscience, the omnipresence, and the omnipotence of God, albeit dummied down because, quite frankly, you can't be 100% light. So I think one of the more important things that we really need to kind of get our minds wrapped around with all this is that as long as you continue to believe that this world is evil, then you yourself will secretly be evil. And truth be told is that's actually a wound. And you're the reason the world has a problem in the first place because you refuse to heal. And if you think for a second that I am talking down to you, you need to know I'm talking up to you because I'm at the bottom of that list when it comes to stuff that I've been healed from. I have plenty that I need to heal from, plenty that I drag my family through, plenty that I have not forgiven, plenty that I need to let go of and actually believe that I am something more than what those things told me. But you're right there with me. And you think for a second that because you said the sinner's prayer, that all that got better. You're wrong. In fact, it got worse because they came along and told you that you were evil. I can say one of the most disgusting things that I have ever encountered is the theology and the theory and the psychology behind the way of the master, which is Ray Comfort. And in his system, he believes that you use Torah to get people to feel guilty so that they will want Christ. And so here's his mechanism. He uses the 10 Commandments. He says, have you ever lied before? Have you ever, it says, the Bible says that if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Have you ever committed adultery before? And of course, the person's going to be like, yeah. When Proverbs chapter 5 says, let her breast satisfy you always, were you supposed to wait until later on to know what those are? right? So every person who has in their function of their existence looked has condemned themselves. Well, that works because that's the total depravity. Now Ray Comfort says, well, then this is what it says. Any person who has lied, any person who is this or this or this has their part in the lake of fire. How does that make you feel? And people start crying. They're like, okay, well, there's a solution. You know, if you encounter Ray in another country where it's legal, don't slap it. All right. So at any rate, here is the context. If you believe the world is evil, then you are evil. No mechanism of stating words and believing things is going to release you from the fact that that's true. If you believe that the world is evil and you are good and you say that you are somehow superior in that way, you need to know that's your ego and not Christ within you. And furthermore, you need to know that it is very arrogant and that it's causing you to be blinded to the horrible things that you actually do as a result of not healing because you already believe you're saved. When the truth is that salvation is a deliverance from discomfort, and your soul is in a state of discomfort because of your wounds. If you believe that the world is evil and you don't believe you are evil and you believe you need to save them while you are still wounded, you are going to project your wounds upon them. You are going to put your bias into any interaction with them. For example, if somebody cheated on you, and now you meet and you are interacting with a friend, and their husband is going and doing some sort of thing that is outside of the marriage, you are absolutely going to try to convince them that he's cheating on them. And here's the crazy part is under the right circumstances, she's going to go back and possibly drive him to that. Don't get me wrong, that's a choice. But I can tell you, you can be pressured and pressured and pressured and pressured to where you finally just surrender to it. Are you cheating on me? No. Are you cheating on me? No. Are you cheating on me? No. Well, maybe I should go cheat on her. That's a real thing. All because of your wound that you never healed from, that you're now projecting on her. The same is true of you men. So don't think just because I used a woman in that example. You will do the exact same thing. Oh, dude, man, you can't put up with that. And it's because you're hurt, right? True objective interaction to bring the light and elevate this world is going to require you to let go of these false doctrines and to see the beauty of what it actually says in your Bible. And part of that is going to require you to change your cultural outlook, to change your lifestyle, to change your language. And I don't mean stop cursing. I mean start understanding and learning the ancient pictographic language of your Father in heaven. Now I point up, but truth be told, your Father in heaven. Okay? Now, here's the part that I think is absolutely important when I say your Father in heaven, okay? That is your intuition. You need to realize everything that pertains to life and godliness was given to you. But everything that pertains to death and to ungodliness was given to you. And the reason is because you need to make a choice. So what was actually given when it says you've been given everything that pertains to life and godliness? You have been given the obedience of an entire universe. And you have been given an actual option to make that reality whatever you want it to be. But you need to know that the feeding of those things is actually your unconscious mind which will make micro adjustments towards the thing that you place in your heart to begin with. When you are consuming information, food, pleasure, etc., ask yourself, am I consuming this so that I feel better about a fear or a pain that I'm experiencing? If you are, then you need a coach. You need somebody to help you out of that, because that's addiction in its simplest sense. But what you need to also know is that that is going to destroy this world, because you're telling yourself it's some evil entity trying to destroy this world. You're telling yourself you're better than those who are actually evil, and you're telling yourself that it's all taken care of and I don't have to worry about it until I die. And you're destroying this world with your darkness, with your pain, with your vices, in which you believe, because you're not downtown in the gutter smoking out of some glass pipe, that you are actually okay. And what's crazy about that is that you will convince yourself that that is actually somebody who needs help. If there's anything I understand about my experience, is that what you believe about yourself is what you will do. But what's interesting is that you will lie to yourself and convince yourself that something's not true when it is. And so you'll create an incongruity in your subconscious won't buy it and will still be the thing you believe about yourself. And then, so you will not succeed. Now, Joshua says, "This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate upon it day and night. For in doing so, and in doing it and obeying it, you will have success." Do you really think that it's a list of rules on the wall that's causing the success? What Torah is trying to communicate to you, and Torah is trying to give you, is an idea that everybody is supposed to be treated equally, and that everybody is supposed to be protected and provided for. And if your American Christian conservative mind can't accept that, you can continue to eat your sodium nitrate infused fatback and go hang golden testicles and silver semen on a phallic symbol. But you're going to continue to destroy this world. And eventually this world will come to a consensus that it needs to be destroyed. The universe will accommodate it, and we will be back at square one like we were at the flood, in which God said, the ground is no longer cursed, it's satisfied. Whatever that dead or darkness or whatever that was that needed to be satisfied is satisfied. Now you can start, humanity. Every time you see the rainbow, remember that this is the truth of what's going on. You're wounding your children. And when you wound your children, they grow up and they wound their children. And that's what that's saying there. It is not an inclination in the sense of a nature that you're born with. That's hogwash. You are not predestined to be disobedient. You are predestined to be the light. However, if you operate in your ego, you'll refuse the light and therefore be disobedient. So do we lean in the direction of, say, Talmudic rabbinical Jews who actually have come into a state of following all these little rules and nuances? Or do we lean on the other side and eat sodium nitrate and infused pork fatback? Or is there something in between the two of those that is actually something more powerful than all of them, and that is the spirit of Torah? Do you know that there's actually a sect of Judaism that believes that the spirit of Torah is actually more powerful than the letter of Torah? That would blow your mind, because most of you Christians don't realize that the spirit of the law that Paul speaks of is actually mentioned by a very famous rabbi who started a very famous sect of Judaism that to this day lives a more nomadic lifestyle than any other sect of Judaism. That's Hasidism. And here's the crazy part about it. Not only do they believe in a spirit of Torah, just like what Paul wrote about, but they also believe that this world will be elevated through a belief in its good, not in its evil. And what's interesting is that what that philosophy did was give access to Goy, to Gentiles, the Torah, and the mysticism of Kabbalah, in which the founder of Hasidism, Baal Shem Tov, believed that a Goy could be taught Kabbalah. Now, the reason why I bring all this up is for you to understand that there is a connection between these two extremes, and that is Revelation 12:17, that the dragon went after the offspring of the woman, okay? The offspring who had the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God. The offspring, the children, went after the youth of the woman. Now, we don't need to discuss who the woman is, but they had the commandments of God and the testimony of Yeshua. Torah and the Messiah as being a what? An imputation, a perpetuation, a redemption, a justification, a sanctification of your soul through what? Through the opportunity to stop thinking in terms of good and evil, but to start thinking in terms of life, of elevation, of altering and changing the vibration, of healing the sick, healing those. And I'm going to tell you right now, the healing art has been lost and replaced by logic, perpetuated through Christianity. Because whenever somebody would come along and start to introduce something magical into the equation, as far as healing went, they were burned at the stake. Now, don't get me wrong, there are malevolent beings practicing very dark things using the same power that I'm talking about that you already have in the way that they are in order to do malevolent things. Those we're told not to suffer to live. But if you understand life, you would know that it's not about the expiration of the body as much as it's about we do not tolerate that they operate within life. What does that mean? In their prosperity, in their whatever. And the premise is that you present Torah to them to pull them out of it and remove them from it. But that's another story altogether. And I don't want to get distracted because I know I don't want this one to go as long as the other one did. The final point that needs to be understood is that if you have identified a fault in your life, you need to realize that whatever circumstances, mechanisms, tools, whatever that are present are not to be blamed. But your framework needs to be blamed, and you need to start to go into a healing process in which you need to enlist someone else to assist you, because you cannot help yourself in this way. You have too many blind spots. You have too many self-denials, self-deceptions. And without some really skilled mind work people, you have buried that information behind deletions, distortions, and generalizations that can't be sought out by yourself. There are modalities that need to be identified. There are specific elements that need to be brought in and memories returned to you, maybe through hypnosis, etc., in which you start to heal. Now, in addition to that, you need to open your mind and start listening to the intuition. And I don't know, I have not gotten to a point yet. And I would like to get to a point, but I'm not, I still battle me where intuition is the only voice I listen to. And maybe someday. And maybe someday that will be for all of us. And all of a sudden it will make sense, because the truth is that there's a flow. There is actually something flowing. Right? If it's the tectonic plates, if it's the wind, if it's the intuition of the higher self, which is Yahweh, who you are, if it is the advice of another in which you kind of feel that tinge and you get mad because they're right. All of those things are some sort of flow because there's some sort of actual end game present in the process that's trying to get us all to that point where this world is elevated and it is not disintegrated. You know, one of the interesting things that I have discovered in my study of the Enneagram and as a personality typology, but also as a philosophy, is I have identified that there's a concept that when a person goes dark, when they become unhealthy, they just stop. But when a person actually integrates, when they actually start to elevate and move forward and become self-actualized, gain self-mastery, and move on to success, they actually start to move out of their personality type into other personality types. And sooner or later, as they move around the whole structure of that typology, they actually experience the other within themselves in a manner in which they never had before. And it's the healthy self. And so it's like everything good that's in your best friend, everything good that's in your mom, everything good that's in your great uncle come out. And it's amazing because there's so many frames of references of what you think is good and what you are inspired by and what makes you come alive, that when it actually happens, you are very, very, very powerful, and you are very, very effective, and you are very, very efficient in your processes. And truth be told, you're also maximized in your power, as I just described earlier, in your authority and in your connection to the divine corporate collective consciousness. All of these things are the actual words from Yeshua. You just don't know how to read it. They're there. Everything that I'm talking about is inside of the Gospels. Not even the apocryphal Gospels. Just the 4 Gospels that everybody just hates if they're not a Christian. They can't stand it. I mean, the anti-missionary Jews, they want to rip it apart. They want to, the pagans, they want to rip it apart. The atheists, they become experts on it and rip it apart. But the truth is that within it is contained all the stuff I'm saying. The stuff that says to unbelievers, you are the light of the world. Why would you hide it under a bushel? Oh, you thought that was only those who believe in Christ. Well, guess what? Not a single person in that crowd believed it was Christ, because the verse says later on in 7, it says, as he walked away, or as they walked away, they said to themselves, like speaking to each other, this man speaks with authority, not like one of our teachers. I don't know how much more blatant information can be in a Christian's Bible, and they are so caught up in parroting their pastor that they miss things, except to say that the framework is so tweaked that when they read it, they can't see it a different way. Oh, and they get angry with me. They get angry with me. They get so mad when I bring this kind of stuff up, because they don't want to be told that they're wrong, because that would hurt their ego. But the truth is that, and I want you to know, I'm actually stealing this quote, but the truth is that the tuition that you pay for the experience is your failures. The cost of success is the mistakes that you make. The way in which you succeed is to learn from your mistakes, instead of going, oh, I'm wrong, and getting depressed about it, or worse yet, trying to defend yourself out to minutia, because here's the crazy part, is you're defending yourself out to minutia. Why? Why are you going so deep into the explanation about why you're right? because you are terrified that you're wrong. And here's the interesting thing about it is when it comes to the simplicity of an answer in which you know you're right, it's a real easy answer. It doesn't require a whole lot of detail or explanation. So why? Because somebody told you you were naked. Somebody told you that you're evil. Somebody told you that being wrong results in hellfire and brimstone and weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's why. And shame on them for that. But now here I'm coming, and now I get it. There's people who want to challenge credentials and all that kind of stuff, and those are just idiots. The moment that you start to believe that an expert needs to have some sort of education, you need to realize that Jews didn't practice that. They didn't practice that. The rabbis would tell them that, but they didn't practice that. A man who was an expert at, say, I don't know, metalwork was not told by a rabbi that he needed to have a credential. That came later on. So my point is that basically what I'm saying is that people may challenge the credential. They may say, well, by what authority do you speak? I'm just going to tell you real easy. By the authority of the Bible you own, do I speak these words. So what do we need to do? In the end, it is simple. It is so simple. You need to humble yourself and accept that you have been duped and told what to do, and told that you can only trust the experts who are only in some sort of accreditation. You were told not to live your life a certain way because you're going to die. And when you die, everything will make sense. Everything will be better, blah, blah, blah. So don't pursue information. Just let that go, right? Don't worry about your life in the sense of healing or getting better, because Christ took all that to the cross. You're fine. Oh, by the way, anybody who doesn't believe like what we're saying, they are actually evil. And just so you know, they're also going to hell. So you probably want to get them to believe what we're saying, right? So that they don't go to hell. But you also would want to stay away from that kind of influence. So stay away from the free thinkers, stay away from the healers, stay away from the people who are trying to make this world better because they don't say a list of 10 things that means that you have succeeded in leading a soul to heaven. And by the way, don't teach them anything that you think is right. Only teach them what we think is right. And again, just remember, you're not an expert. You need an expert. Do you see where this gets really dark really fast? Do you see where you are not free? Do you see where a religion has actually created a nation of people who will just follow the leader right into hell? Because I can tell you that if I was the intensification of all power in the universe and I saw this level of manipulation going on, I would create a place just for the people who claim that that place exists, so that they could realize that it was not true. I know that sounds contradictory and paradoxical, but the truth is that that's who needs punishment. That's who needs the wrath of God, are those who have created that filth. That is not the God I serve. That is not the religion I practice. Don't get me wrong, I am not perfect. But I can tell you that I do not buy into the idea that humanity is inherently evil. I buy into the idea that they are inherently the light and that they're in denial of it because of their wounds that they need to be healed from. So I need to go be the light to them in order for them to heal. Now, granted, there is some sort of block upon the power that is spoken of in the Bible. There are trickles of it. There's evidence of trickles of it, but not at the magnitude of the book of Acts. And I believe that is because the truth has been so suppressed. Why would Yahweh want to offer healing to a person who chooses to disobey his food laws? If you can answer that, which the answer might shock you, I'm not going to give it to you, then you will understand more about your God than you ever understood before. So the key to this whole entire concept is that there is actually only one idol. There is actually only one false god. And that is the identity that you have developed through your wounds, from your framework, from your childhood that needs to heal before you put it on other people and bring more junk into this world. Because you've been given sovereignty so that you would freely choose the giver and not the gift. Now you understand the pain in this world has been all about propagating that framework. Shabbat Shalom.